As the hitting intensifies, it's 1-0 Montreal. On a power play for another 50 seconds. Richards trying to scoot in there alone. Halak way out of the net. It pinballs to the crease. Score! Mike Richards!
The Flyer captain is announcing his presence as the alpha male early in this one. Big hit. Sets up that cranker from Coburn, the defenseman joining the attack. They win a puck deep in their own zone. Hammerleck and the goaltender Halak collide. Oh, did they ever. And it's a tap in for Richards.
Everybody, it's Isaiah. Just reminding you that FlyersNittyGritty.com and the O&B Puckcast are brought to you by Summit Public Adjusters. Hey, do you have damage to your home? Not sure who to call? We suggest that you call Summit Public Adjusters before your insurance company. Dealing with your insurance company can be very stressful. Let Summit take the stress out of the claims process. From storm damage to your roof, to toilet overflows, to broken pipes and fires, Summit gets you the most money for your repairs. So next time Mother Nature leaves you in need of repairs, call Summit Public Adjusters at 215-752-0560 or visit summitpublicadjusters.com. Licensed in PA and New Jersey.
And we are back. It is Isaiah. Welcome to the O&B Puckcast, episode number 192, brought to you by FlyersNittyGritty.com, of course. And looks like the Flyers have done most of what they're going to do this offseason between the draft, free agency acquisitions, and a recent buyout of Tony DeAngelo. We'll talk about that and a lot more. Of course, we have a great guest coming up. But first, let's introduce the panel. Always to my left, and sometimes in the car. His name is Chef B. What's on your mind, man?
Nothing. Just looking forward to I guess the anticipation for the season is like probably like we've never seen in probably 10 years. So it should be fun. I'm looking to talk about a couple of things. It'll be a blast. I think this will be a fun show.
Yeah, I think so. It's a little different kind of anticipation. Yeah, it should be interesting. And of course, as always, the great Dan Silver.
I can't say I've got the same kind of, maybe it's a different anticipation Chef has for this season. By the way, folks can't see us, but Chef's got a really good haircut. He's got a birthday coming up. I'm really digging the Chef vibe today, but I'm not sure about the anticipation. My anticipation is more to see like what moves get made during the season and how close we can get to the number one spot going into the draft lottery. But it's the dog days of summer. It's hot. We're we'll have some good things to talk about though.
You guys are dealing. I'm in Florida, so don't complain about hot. But yeah, will Emil Andre stick around or will we go to Sweden? That's like the next big drama. Maybe. Hey, before we get going and bring in our guests, I just want to remind everybody that the O&B Puckcast is on about a dozen podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, TuneIn, Amazon Audible, Google, and of course we have our own YouTube channel. Plug in there, the O&B Puckcast, and we have a Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter at O&B Puck, at O&B Puck. Our backup platform is Getter at O&B Puckcast, at O&B Puckcast. And if you could follow or subscribe, whatever is appropriate for your particular platform, the O&B Puckcast, it really helps us out. It moves us up the charts when people are looking for a Philadelphia Flyer podcast, which is what we are, of course. And of course, we are the leading Puckcast for the Flyers as well. not out there to our buddy Rush Joy. So, hey, one more thing before we go today, we have a new promo with Dauber Hockey. They're at dauberhockey.com, at Dauber Hockey on Twitter. And they are really leading experts in fantasy hockey. They're advanced statistics and, of course, prospects. So great guys to follow. And you can get their 23-24 fantasy hockey guide. If you stay tuned till the end of the show, we'll tell you how to qualify for that. We're going to have one giveaway, and we're going to have a series of giveaways over the next couple shows. So hang loose for Dauber Hockey Fantasy Guide. And with that, without any further ado, let's bring in from the footperiod.com, Stick to Hockey podcast, seemingly ubiquitous this last several months with Flyers news. And of course, you know him as Anthony DiMarco.
What's going on, boys? As Dan mentioned, dog days of summer for sure, but always got to find some time to talk about hockey to get our fix, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hey, Anthony, let's just get right into this. What happened with Tony DeAngelo with the buyout instead of a deal that Don Waddell even said was probably going to go down? It was, there was a technicality there. I want to take a look at what maybe the Flyers should have known going into that deal, and also whether the Flyers actually backed into a situation that was ended up more to their benefit versus the other scenario that was proposed.
Yeah, and this wasn't even like local reporters or a guy like me who focuses a lot on the Flyers who was talking about this. Like, this was Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic and TSN. This was Elliot Friedman. Don Waddell himself alluded to it. Like, everyone expected this deal to go down, and all of a sudden the Flyers elected to go the buyout route. And we could get into why that's arguably the better route than trading DeAngelo at 50% for Massimo Rizzo, the prospect who was going to be coming back the other way. But I had heard on Friday that it was Tom Dunn, the owner, that got involved in this. What kind of factor he played, I can't exactly say, but all I was told was he's a numbers guy and that they were going to leave it at that. So maybe they didn't want to bring in Tony DeAngelo, who would be presumably playing on their third pairing, paying him $2.5 million, especially when you have a guy, let's say, by the name of Jalen Chatfield, who plugged that hole last year. So it feels like as my cat once again already gets involved into this podcast, it feels like Tom Dunn's played in some capacity a role here. But as you alluded to, Isaiah, as I just mentioned, I think that in a lot of ways, this is kind of beneficial. You don't bring back a prospect in Massimo Rizzo, who I don't know if he's signed yet to an ELC. I don't believe so. So it wouldn't be taking up a contract spot. But it's more in the way of the retention spot and the cap space that I think is advantageous for the Flyers to have gone the buyout route. Because by buying out DeAngelo this year, you have, I believe it's $8.3 or $830,000 more in cap space than you would have had you retained 50%. And aside from that, you still allow yourself to retain money on two potential more players if you look to go that route in the season. Maybe that's a Mark Stahl, maybe that's a Sean Walker, maybe that's a whoever it may be, right? And I think that at the trade deadline, being able to retain salary gets you more in return. I think we've seen that with Claude Giroux recently. We've seen that with Justin Braun recently. Like, for a team like the Flyers, having every kind of asset at their disposal will help them in the way of return. And that's a big asset for the Flyers. It's going to be able to return salary on guys as potential trade chip pieces. And yes, you do have the dead cap space next year of $1.66 million on DeAngelo that you wouldn't have had on a retained salary trade. But at the same time, cap is supposed to go up rather significantly for the first time since 2019 next year. Don't think the Flyers are going to be in a position where they're in the need of an additional $1.6 million of cap space. So I think all in all, this was probably a situation where it got way too complicated for the Flyers to like it, and they just decided to go the buyout route because in a lot of ways it made more sense.
Yeah, I think that really the most important part, as Anthony mentioned, was the retention spots, because I'm sort of viewing the next few seasons with the Flyers as what kind of assets is Danny Briere going to be able to generate by weaponizing cap space, taking on players from other teams and also getting some other teams to take some of our players. You only have 3 retention spots And right now, Kevin Hayes is tied up for the next 3 years with one of those retention spots. So if you had retained on DeAngelo, yeah, it would have just been 1 year of retention, but it limits what you can potentially do this year. The Flyers may want to get teams to retain on various players during the year that they're going to be trading. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with Travis Sanheim? His no trade clause is now in effect, but I'm guessing he'd waive it to go to a team like Winnipeg or Calgary. And maybe, the Flyers end up retaining on that for a few years or something like that. Who knows? But being able to have 2 retention spots left for the next 2 years as opposed to just one for the rest of this season, I think makes a big difference. And as Anthony mentioned, the money doesn't really matter for next year. A few of the interesting things for me are the bad positions that kind of Danny Briere was put in with both Kevin Hayes and Tony DeAngelo. I think mainly because of how John Tortorella felt about those guys. So I think that's one thing to watch moving forward. We maybe get into it a little later in the show, but I still have some concerns about how the whole Tortorella through a rebuild type of thing pans out over the next few seasons. And then again, my other concern, and I think this isn't as much of a concern because Danny Briere is a new GM in the league, and he's going to have some good moves and some moves that aren't quite as good and make some mistakes. Obviously, the creativity he showed moving Ivan Provorov in a three-team deal was very good. I think that to different extents, the St. Louis deal that fell through and then the Carolina deal that fell through, both deals you maybe could put, certainly the St. Louis deal, I think you can put more of the blame on the St. Louis management, but I still think that before a deal like that kind of gets out, that both teams involved should kind of confirm that all guys involved are willing to waive their no trade clauses or no movement clauses. And that didn't happen in that case. So that was kind of one issue. And then, I don't know if him or, Carolina GM didn't really know about the league situation with what held up the DeAngelo move. So in and of itself, those 2 moves, like each one, I wouldn't make a huge deal out of, but put them together and it's 2 moves that maybe Briere kind of should have known a little bit more about. But again, I expected it. And I still am a proponent of, what's happened during the offseason so far.
Mm-hmm. Chef?
I wanted to ask Anthony this. Since you brought up Stahl and a couple players they signed, are we expecting and can we expect these guys? I guess definitely. I mean, probably most likely, almost definitely Stahl, but somebody like Hathaway too. Are they like trade, I guess, currency for future draft picks at the trade deadline this year to make sure that we're restocking the farm, so to speak, with potential picks? You see that he was possibly maybe more so Stahl than Hathaway, I'm guessing, but somebody that was brought in on a senior deal or whatever, and he's going to go. He's with the promise of maybe getting traded to a contender for a draft pick at the trade deadline. Is that something you could see that's probably was worked out in these 2 cases?
Yeah, like I'm sure that kind of just comes inherently when you sign contracts like this. And the 2 guys I really look at are Sean Walker and Mark Stahl. Those are the 2 types of defensemen that you often see teams trade like mid to late round picks for to, kind of supplement on your bottom pairing. Obviously, Mark Stahl played a 3rd pairing role for a team that just went to the Stanley Cup final. I think Sean Walker is actually an underrated defenseman. Like he kind of like in terms of like tier of player, kind of like a Justin Braun type in his prime, a guy who could maybe be your 4 or 5, obviously a right shot, which always holds more value on the trade front, as we've seen, or on the UFA front as well. Just right shot defensemen are always just so tough to come by. But I think those 2 guys in particular, I would be relatively shocked if they're here beyond the trade deadline next season. In regards to Hathaway, I don't think so. Like maybe in a year and a half when he's on an expiring contract, he's a guy that you could get a pretty good return for. But I was told that leading into free agency, they wanted to get bigger and they wanted to get tougher to play against. And obviously, I kind of lit some heads on fire yesterday when I was talking about Nick Delorier. But in the case of Garnet Hathaway, he's actually like a really good bottom sixer. Like you could make the case that Garnet Hathaway could be a 3rd liner on a lot of good teams. Obviously, if you have Stanley Cup aspirations, much like the Boston Bruins did last year. He's more of a fourth line guy. But if he's playing in a fourth line role, like along with Will Carrier of the Vegas Golden Knights, like you can make the case that Garnet Hathaway is like the best among traditional fourth liners you can find. And I think from a Flyers point of view is like you have a fourth line, which 2/3 are going to be made up of Delorier and Hathaway. And then your 4C is going to be one of Ryan Poehling, maybe Scott Lawton, depending on what wingers push through in the top 9, and on an outside chance at Tanner Lazinski. So as far as defensemen go, Stahl, Walker, Nick Seeler, those guys I think are very likely to get moved. Maybe not so much Seeler because I don't know if he has the same amount of cachet as, let's say, Stahl and Walker do. But in terms of Hathaway, I would be shocked if he isn't here in 24-25, just because I think that he's a big part of an identity that they're trying to build. And as we saw when in the Ron Hextall rebuild, like they became and I know this is kind of like a polarizing statement nowadays, but like the tough to play against thing. And there's a lot of different things. Like you can't just be a pylon, but you're going to threaten to break someone's face. You have to be able to skate a regular shift. But I do think in the Hextall rebuild, they were a bad team that were easy to play against. Like you would throw out Van de Velde, Belmar, and Dale Weiss on your fourth line, and it wasn't like that you had to grind it out against them. Now, if you have Delorier, Poehling, and Hathaway, that's a tough fourth line to play against, and decent hockey players as well. So I think that Hathaway, Delorier, these guys are part of the identity moving forward. And being fourth line guys predominantly, it's not like they're going to block any kids.
Yeah, I could see that. You know, the thing that gets me or grasps me about this offseason, it's like the peaks and valleys. You have the peak of the Provorov trade, which is going to bring you back Helge Grans, the Cal Peterson, that kind of nets them a first-round draft pick, and Sean Walker. And people were really happy about the creativity, getting a third team involved and all that. And then there's all this talk, Anthony, about these names out there that we referred to just earlier. And the people had a little bit of a letdown. But then they draft Mitchkov. So it's kind of like, peaks and valleys. And then it was, Tony DeAngelo is getting traded, but he's not traded. Do the Flyers know what they're doing? What was behind? Yeah, I know you talked about it was probably driven by Carolina saying, nah, we're not going to do this, and numbers and things like that. But if they thought the deal was going to go through, how did they not know about that technicality? And who's responsible for that? Because they wanted it to go through when it happened.
I think Frank Saravalli mentioned this, and he mentioned that, and he even disagreed with the NHL's basis on this, is that deal happened on draft day 2 of last year, which was July 8th or 9th or 7th, whatever it was. It was 2 weeks later than it was this year. And and I think teams were of the understanding that it was like in a NHL year, it was just draft to draft, not specific day. And then the NHL was just like, well, no, this happened on July 8th, 2022. You have to wait till July 8th, 2023, as opposed to maybe the Flyers and the Hurricanes who just wanted to lay the groundwork and be like, okay, we'll have it go through on day 2 of the draft this year because it went through on day 2 of the draft last year. So I think that's maybe where it got complicated. And on the Carolina side of things, like they have so many things going on. Like they're right in the mix with an Erik Karlsson. Are they trying to move on from another forward to, liberate that cap space? What's going to go on with Brett Pesce? They have a lot of defensemen, I think, that are whose deals are expiring by like 2025, Jacob Slavin included. So there's like a lot of house cleaning that has to go on the part of the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think the Flyers just said, you know what, the hell with this. We're just going to buy him out, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of points to be made that would say that buying out is more advantageous to the Flyers. So, and I heard Dan kind of bring this up before, and I tend to agree, is that we've seen John Tortorella's fingerprints all over a lot of these roster moves. Not to say he's the one answering the calls and filing the papers to the NHL front office, but like you can tell, and I had heard this through the grapevine, so take it for what it's worth, that this offseason was predominantly about getting rid of the problem children in Tortorella's eyes, as opposed to more like bringing in assets. And I think we've seen that, right? It was a lot of, with the exception of Carter, of the Ivan Provorov trade, it was a lot about just getting rid of guys at any cost as opposed to getting rid of guys and maximizing assets. And if Saravalli talked about this too on his podcast, where like Tony DeAngelo, like he wasn't bad last year, like all in all, like he still put up 45 points in 70 games or something. Like that's still a good production for a guy who was scratched like 5 to 10 games, a guy who was not good in his own end, and a guy who was in the doghouse of the coach for a lot of it. Like he's still a productive defenseman. And I just kind of, and I know that money's tough to move even for quality players right now in the flat cap world. We saw that with Johansson. We saw that with Matt Duchene. So you have to take that into account as well. But it still kind of struck me for a right shot defenseman who is as offensively productive as DeAngelo is, that you couldn't find like another team who was willing to take him on. And it just felt like the Flyers were just like, the first chance you have to get rid of this guy, get rid of him at any cost. And I do think that that is a one thing about the offseason that not rubbed me the wrong way, because we don't know what goes on in the room. We know that John Tortorella emphasized culture a lot, and I can respect that. It's just the one part of the offseason and the one part of like the team's goals that I was just like, I'm not sure if that should have been as prioritized.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, we look at it. Kevin Hayes was the second leading scorer on this team, despite being in Torts' doghouse for most of the season. He was, after Konechny, he was the second leading scorer on the team with 54 points. Tony DeAngelo was the leading defenseman scorer on the team. So basically the narrative kind of took over that these guys were problems and that Torts didn't want them on the team. And that sort of bled over into a lot of people kind of dismissing the talent that they have as hockey players. But the fact that we traded our second leading scorer and our leading defenseman scorer, and we literally basically got nothing in return. I mean, the one guy we bought out, we didn't want. So we didn't want our leading defensive scorer, and we traded our second leading regular scorer for a 6th-round pick or 5th, whatever it was. I mean, it is a little crazy.
Yeah, no, it is. And to be honest, like the DeAngelo thing, like whatever, we know his history, doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt, but the way that Torts zeroed in on Kevin Hayes always kind of struck me as a bit bizarre, where it's just like, yeah, I remember him saying like, there's more to give there. And I'm just like, he's 31. What do you mean there's more to give? He's a 50-point NHL center who's maybe a mediocre 2C in the NHL. And going into this year, like I've always done this. If you average out Hayes's point totals per 82 games since signing with the Flyers, he's right in that 50, 51 point range, which, I mean, if we all knew that the contract was expensive, was too much, like any UFA signing, but like if I told you in 2019 when he signed that he would be average 50 points per 82 games, I think we'd all be like, yeah, that's a good signing. That's what we're expecting of Kevin Hayes. And I just always found it kind of bizarre that Kevin Hayes, had the A ripped off of him and he was just put in the doghouse, played out of position. But as Dan said, like you're removing, your second best player in terms of point production and your best defenseman in terms of point production, and you're getting nothing in return. And I could understand that. It's just that if these were the two guys that you wanted to get rid of at all costs, fine. But it can't be more than just these two guys. And I think that's why you saw Travis Sanheim not get moved. Because I think, and this is me just piecing things together, is this was Danny Briere putting his stake in the ground and saying, like, you know what, Torts, like I get you're not a fan of him, but we're not going to trade this guy for pennies on the dollar. Because Travis Sanheim's still a quality second pair defenseman in the NHL. Say what you will about the contract, say what you will about how he played this year, was not a good year for him by any stretch, but trading he's 26, 27 years old, trading Travis Sanheim for nothing.
27, I think.
Yeah, or he drafted in 2014. So yeah, in that range. I don't think that would have been a good look, because I know that Danny Briere is a fan of Travis Sanheim. And, I've heard mixed things on how John Tortorella feels about him. I've heard that he feels that he doesn't play well when the chips are down. I believe Anthony Sanfilippo said that as well. But you could not move on from a Travis Sanheim for nothing, even if you just wanted to get out from under that contract. I don't think that would have been a good look. So in a certain way, I'm happy Travis Sanheim is still here, not because I like that contract or not because I I think that he's pivotal in the trajectory of this team long term, but more so that I was happy to see Danny Briere management kind of hold firm and be like, look, we got rid of the two guys for absolutely nothing who were still quality players, but this is one person that we're not going to budge on. If we can't get fair value, he's going to stay.
Well, and the thing is, Torrey Krug, had he said yes, he would have been here and Sanheim gone, but we get the first round draft pick and that player. So in other words, you're just going to let go of a player without getting a value. And that begs the question right now as we go forward. It's like you were saying before that this is kind of Tortorella's offseason, his chance to clear out players that were the so-called problem children. But from here on out, and I think also last year in the case of Morgan Frost, Danny Briere is going to have to push back, and people are going to notice this kind of battle of wills going forward between the two. It's Danny's show at this point. I mean, Tortorella's already in year 2. He's got 2 more years, and who knows if he's going to even finish out the contract, depending on how things play out.
Yeah, and the Morgan Frost stuff is getting interesting. I was actually texting a few people today about this, and it feels like Morgan Frost's agent is digging in on this. And, I was looking for comparables with Morgan Frost as basically once Morgan Frost is finished up, there's nothing really left for the Flyers to do between now and training camp. And the one guy I landed on was Alex Newhook. And obviously Newhook 2 years younger than Frost, but their stats and games played are very similar. Newhook has 66 points through 159 games, and Frost has 69 points through 158 games. And Alex Newhook just signed for 4 years at $2.9 million AAV. I wonder if that's something that we could look at with Frost. This is grapevine, so I can't say 100% if it's true, but I've heard that maybe his agent wants to walk Frost to UFA status in 3-4 years time. And Morgan Frost would be how old at that point? He would probably be 27. So I'd imagine it'd be like a 3-year contract. And what I also heard is that, and again, this is grapevine, is that the Flyers offered him as much as 6 years at maybe a touch over $4 million. But I think that Morgan Frost can, because of how well he performed in year 5, which was this year, I believe, of professional hockey, or it could have been year 4, actually, 46 points in 81 games, with the cap going up, locking his client up for, let's say, $4.25 million until he's 30 years old, that could probably turn into a bargain on the Flyers side. So it's weird where this is going to go with Morgan Frost, because he is their de facto 1C until Cutter Gauthier shows up and takes that away from him. I think he's going to be their 1C. So, it feels like if the Flyers want to go long-term, this is going to have to be in that $5 million plus range. But on Frost's side, maybe it feels like they want to go shorter term and have a chance to have Frost as a UFA. Maybe if you went 3 years at $3 million, I've also heard maybe 1 year. But at the end of the day, my best source did tell me we're all over the place with them right now, and we don't know where it's going. But it feels that a lot of options have been tossed around, because maybe Danny Briere is putting his stake in the ground, and it doesn't feel like Morgan Frost's agent is budging either.
Interesting.
The Frost stuff is really interesting to me, because I've been a big fan of his. He's, if Torts got his way with Hayes and DeAngelo, I still think when push comes to shove that Torts is not a huge fan of Morgan Frost. And I think that Danny Briere and Brett Flair are big fans of his, and that they he's the player that I think probably caused the most internal drama when Briere and maybe Torts and Flair are talking during the season. And I think Briere, just excised the guys that Torts wanted gone. Torts said all the right things towards the end of the season about Frost. And I thought Frost played well, but and I think there is some unlocked offensive potential there. But this is an interesting one, because guys like Noah Cates and Cam York, I think Torts is certainly fully on board with Cates. I think York he sees as a top 2 pair NHL D-man. I still don't think that John Tortorella is sold on Morgan Frost, which kind of makes this a little interesting. I almost would because I think that Frost does have a good relationship with Briere, right? So I would sort of be interested to signing to a deal that I wouldn't think it's the worst thing in the world to sign him to a deal that leads him to UFA and make him prove it over the course of the next 3 seasons. I wouldn't hate it, because as big of a fan as I am of Frost, I'm still not sure that when Gauthier gets here, let's say he's playing center, we're going to add another really good player in the draft next year, maybe a center. I don't know where Frost's ultimate role is on a team like this if you really want to become a cup contender a year or two after Mishkov comes over. So the Frost stuff's going to be interesting. I want to see how he builds on what he did last year. He put up good numbers this past season, but Tortorella just gave him all the reign in the world last year. And I think that was because of pressures put on him by Briere and Flair. But I think this year, the Frost thing is going to be really interesting to see kind of what happens with him. If Couturier is back and healthy and Cates is going to eat up a lot of big minutes for Tortorella, if those two guys are the centers, I'm interested to see what happens with Frost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Morgan Frost, as you said, and as I mentioned, until Cutter Gauthier shows up, he's their 1C. I think Cates and Sean Couturier are going to be your 2-3C in some capacity. And especially with Kevin Hayes out of the picture, who played 1C for periods of last season, I don't see anyone who could take that away from Morgan Frost between now and whenever Cutter Gauthier shows up, and if he plays center when he takes that spot. So in my opinion, like, Morgan Frost to me should have free reign. Like, you have nothing to lose now, because you have no player right now at the Lehigh level or at the Philadelphia level that fits that skill set. Now, once Gauthier shows up, it does get interesting, right? Because you have Couturier locked in until the end of time. We don't presume Noah Cates is going anywhere anytime soon. You have Elliot Denwyer somewhere kicking around, and all of a sudden it's just like, man, like, there's actually a decent amount of center options here all of a sudden. You still have Scott Lawton, who could play center, but I think we all agree that he's more of a left winger at this point in his career, unless he's playing on the 4th line. So, I mean, when I heard the 6-7 year term at $4 to $4.5 million, and again, that's just grapevine. That's not me reporting. It's just some chatter I've heard. It kind of struck me because I'm just like Dan said, like, what kind of role is he going to have when Gauthier is here? When Michkov shows up, when all these guys are fully developed. I really don't think that they're in a position right now to lock Frost up, given his potential role going forward. But at the same time, I have been told this and can tell you with 100% certainty that they feel management-wise that he can be that, and they would be comfortable committing that long-term to him because they believe in him as a player. So where I ultimately think it goes, maybe they split the difference, 3 years, $3.5 million. I think that would kind of be like a fair range for Morgan Frost. And I'm kind of basing it off of the Alex Newhook deal because their point production has been so similar. But it really feels that this could end up being a 1-year deal. It could end up being a 5-year deal. Like, I don't know where this is going, but Morgan Frost is in a very, very unique spot because of all the things we just kind of outlined.
Real quick. So I'm not, we'll see what happens. Anthony's more tied in with the team than I am. I just don't see Morgan Frost as the 1C this year. Like, if Sean Couturier is healthy, and we know how much Torts loves Noah Cates, he ate a lot of big minutes last year. I'm just viewing him as the 3C. Now, this team has 6 pretty good wingers, right? You talk about Atkinson, Konechny, Tippett, Farabee, Lawton, and Tyson Forster as potentially like the top 6 wingers. So you could say that it might be a little interchangeable. Obviously, I think Konechny and Farabee are probably your top line wingers. Konechny on the right, Farabee on the left. But I don't see Torts as giving Frost first line minutes, especially if Couturier is back and healthy. And I got to go look right now and see what so this year, this year, Noah Cates was averaging 17 minutes and 46 seconds, and Morgan Frost was averaging 16 minutes and 21 seconds. Like, I don't see the universe where Coots is fully healthy and Frost gets more minutes than him and Cates. Now, maybe they'll try and ease back in Cates, but Are you saying Frost is the 1C? I mean, is that based on discussions you've had with people, or is that kind of your opinion on how it's going to pan out?
It's, you know what, the Tortorella factor is a very good point because he is so unpredictable, and it feels like sometimes he does things to cut off his nose just to spite his face, like to prove a point. And he has, carte blanche on this team, especially a team that isn't expected to win. It's just more me looking at, I believe that's where Frost was playing by the end of last season. He was playing 1C. Maybe not in terms of time on ice. And you make a good point. Like the time on ice will probably be comparable between the three of them. But I mean more of like a 1C on like the top scoring line and even maybe time on ice. Like, in my opinion, there's no reason why Morgan Frost shouldn't be playing 1C. Because Sean Couturier, to me, he's what? This is going to be year 2 of an 8-year contract. You now have to maximize Sean Couturier's longevity. And you have to now find a niche for him to make him last the longest for the duration of this contract. And for me, Sean Couturier, in my opinion, there's no reason why he should be playing more than 15, 16 minutes a night, because that's the only way that you are going to be able to get the most out of Sean Couturier for the longest duration of this contract. You don't need Sean Couturier to be playing what he used to. The reason why Sean Couturier is in this situation right now is because of how many hard minutes he put on his body from 18 years old until he was 29, 30 years old. And for me, going long-term, now that you have Noah Cates, you have Morgan Frost, you're eventually going to have Cutter Gauthier, they're not in a position where they're trying to win. There is no reason to just bury Sean Couturier with hard minutes. Noah Cates. I think in some way you can make the case Noah Cates should be playing 1C, but I think that if you split time almost evenly between Frost and Cates, let's say they're both playing 17 minutes a night, Couturier's in that 15 to 16 range, and then you could have a Ryan Poehling or a Scott Lawton kind of making up the difference. I think that's what you have to go with, because where the Flyers are at organizationally, you have to start figuring out what guys are long-term for this team. And Sean Couturier is not the long-term solution as your 1C and probably not as your 2C. And if Morgan Frost is going to be a staple on this team, we just kind of talked about that, it's going to be as a 2C long-term. So you might as well have him play kind of that role alongside a Noah Cates. That's the way I see it, because playing Morgan Frost 15 minutes a night as your 3C to me would just be a waste of his talent and a waste of time in trying to figure out what the player can give you long-term. That's my view on it.
Yeah, I can see that. I think with Tortorella, it's just knowing him. If Sean Couturier shows him anything, I think he's going to get the lion's share. So you got to balance out what you're probably right about with the reality of what John Tortorella is going to do. Chef?
Well, my concern, the reality of everything is this is all good to say, but until we find out what Sean Couturier can actually do still, and Cam Atkinson too. These are guys both coming off of major surgeries, healthy, and being able to do one thing, saying it and being actually putting it into reality. We don't know what these limitations are left anymore. This is not going to be the Sean Couturier of 2-3 years ago, or the Cam Atkinson of that, for that matter. I just think that, I want to temper expectations on just because we got Couturier back and we got Atkinson back doesn't mean we're getting the player at 100%. We might even be getting this player at 70, 75%. So I'm trying to factor in all that, and I can't see how Sean Couturier is a 1C at this point. I'm thinking C, 2C or 3C even. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but until I can see what he can actually still do, I'm very reserved at any predictions or what he can contribute to this lineup anymore.
So, Chef, I just want to ask you, because you made this in your intro about how, for you, this was one of the most anticipated Flyer seasons in a while. You just kind of cold-watered Couturier and Atkinson coming back. So what is so exciting and anticipated going into this season about the Flyers?
Well, exciting for me is we get to see all these new things happening, these young kids finally getting their shot. I'm fine with, Couturier and Atkinson playing. I don't want anybody to think I'm not. I want to see it, but I'm just excited, I guess, for the whole team in general. There's just a general buzz about everything around this team. I want them both to do well. There's two players, I guess maybe I'm excited, but I'm also cautiously excited because I don't want to be disappointed again. So maybe I can be happy about, all the other players on the team, but I can also hold reserve for what to expect from these two, I guess, aging players. And I don't know. I'm excited about everything, but I guess I'm just trying not to make sure I don't get disappointed again, crushed, my heart crushed.
That's fair. I mean, so just for me, I mean, I think this team's going to be really bad this year, right? And that's great because that's what I want. Like, I want to get another top 5, maybe top 3 pick in the draft, right? Because if we could pair a guy like Michkov with a Macklin Celebrini or a Demidov who's over there in Russia with him, or an Cole Iserman, like that, we could have a really good situation with 2 potential superstars, and Gauthier certainly could be in that class too. For me, the excitement about this season is mainly about the fact that we've got the new leadership with Briere and Jones, and seeing kind of what they're going to do during the season to try and position this team to be a cup contender when Michkov comes over, right? Or at least within a few years of that. So like, I think that the on-ice product this year is going to be real bad. I don't think that there's a whole lot of rookies that I'm excited about this year. Emil Andre, who I don't even know if will be on the roster, he's kind of like the rookie that I would be the most excited to see on this team. I guess, I don't know if Forster's still eligible as a rookie, but if he is, I think he is, but he's another one. Yes, but for me, really the excitement and anticipation is about the new leadership with Briere and Jones, and kind of seeing what they do, what trades they make to position themselves a number of years down the road to be good. And look, I renewed my season tickets, right? I'm a glutton for punishment, whatever. But I just think the on-ice product this year is going to be real bad.
Yeah, I mean, the defense is going to be horrendous. If there's any injuries at center, you're really going to be pushing Frost and Cates into some really tough minutes. And this is where Couturier could make a big difference and help them. And kind of positioning myself into Anthony's camp and thinking that's Couturier's main role. I'm not worried so much about the minutes Couturier is going to compile. It's what he can do with his minutes to make it easier for Frost and Cates to develop and be put in a better situations going forward. And anything else beyond that is a bonus. But how is it going to sort out in goal? And that's a whole thing, because right now there are a lot of whispers as we turn toward this unpleasant subject. There are the whispers of an announcement about what could be happening with Team Canada and the investigation for their 2018 team, in which Carter Hart was on the squad. I'd heard different things, and I heard a retraction of that, but some of it might have been ominous. And we don't know. They know. And there was a lot of talk and trade talk around Carter Hart. And Anthony, maybe you could fill us in about what the milieu was. I mean, was there actual discussion about Carter Hart? Did it get hushed by someone making a phone call and saying, hey, is Carter Hart going to be an issue? Like, what's in the offing that you can tell?
Well, I'll preface this by saying that I can't say one way or another if he's involved. I don't know. I mean, there's been a lot of speculation as to whether or not he's involved. Obviously, he's one of the few players that hasn't completely withdrawn himself from involvement with an official letter. But I have gotten the sense, and that's all it is a sense that the Flyers have kind of been bracing for the worst. I can tell you that I do think a trade would have happened by now if this wasn't looming. I think, and Dan and I kind of discussed this the other day over text, I do believe that in a perfect world, the Flyers think that Carter Hart would be more valuable to them via trade than playing for them. And we could kind of get into why that would be the case. But I'm just, and again, this is just me kind of reading tea leaves, trying to connect dots. It feels like Carter Hart won't be here, or they're expecting him not to be here. And it's mostly because of the way Cal Peterson's acquisition has been described to me, because it was never described to me as like, yeah, we just took the money to get an extra asset. It was routinely described to me as a safety valve, safety valve, safety valve, safety valve. And they were never looking to buy him out. They were never looking to move him. And the other thing is that Cal Peterson's camp has vocalized that they think that he's going to have a shot here. Well, if Carter Hart's here, I don't think he has a snowball's chance of hell of having a shot here on the main roster. If Carter Hart's here, your tandem, I would bet a bottom dollar on is Hart and Felix Sandstrom. I think Felix Sandstrom in some form or fashion is the backup goalie here, because I think the Flyers do see value in him. And given what this season is going to be, they'd rather not lose him on waivers. So if that's the case, I mean, Peterson's not going to beat out Hart. He's probably not going to beat out Ursan if it's a battle between the starting goaltenders. So it just lends me to believe that it's between, Hart not coming here or not being here for training camp. So I'm assuming, and again, this is just tea leaves, I can't reiterate enough, this is me reporting it. It's just me kind of connecting dots and coming to the assumption that your goaltending tandem on opening night will probably be Cal Peterson and Felix Sandstrom. That's what I'm thinking. And to Dan's point, if your goal is to be really, really bad this year, that's probably your best case, right? Cal Peterson, Felix Sandstrom, like, awesome, let's do it. And I do think that if Carter Hart is here, like we saw the last year or probably the last 2 years, he's probably going to win you more games than you should because he is that good of a goaltender. So I think in a lot of ways, Carter Hart not being here in some form or fashion is probably for the best of this team from an on-ice perspective. But if he's not present for training camp and not in the way of being traded, it's not in the best way for every other possible reason.
It's the Hart stuff is very, it's tricky, right? I want to read a tweet from Rick Westhead from July 13th. He's a reporter for TSN up in Canada. He tweeted, several team executives, sponsors, and player agents tell me they are bracing for the NHL's possible release of an investigation report regarding an alleged sexual assault involving as many as 8 players on Canada's 2018 World Juniors team. If NHL names and suspends players allegedly involved, affected players would likely appeal any sanctions to an arbitrator as per the collective bargaining agreement and may pursue defamation lawsuits versus the league, said agent of one player who attended 2018 Hockey Canada Gala. While an investigating officer in October wrote in court documents he believes there are grounds to charge at least 5 players, police in London, Ontario, continue to decline comment, other than to say an investigation is ongoing. So there's a lot of interesting components to this. One is that there's this police investigation that no one has been charged yet, right? So the NHL clearly has been kind of monitoring this and doing their own investigation. If the NHL goes out there and suspends a number of players based on being allegedly involved, I think that is going to open a can of worms. Now, clearly, as Anthony mentioned, and as this tweet from a highly respected reporter kind of puts out there, there is the expectation, I think, that at some point, over the summer, maybe soon, that the NHL is going to announce possible suspensions. This text or this tweet from Rick Westhead also read to me as beware NHL. Like, if you do this before these players are actually charged, they're gonna counter sue the NHL. So this thing is gonna get super messy, and whether or not Hart's involved or not, they're clearly not going to be able to move him until they find out. Taking all that out of the equation, if we look at the players that the Flyers have that probably have the most trade value right now, it's clearly, I would say, Travis Konechny. He's on a great contract for the next few seasons. Scott Lawton on a really good contract for the next few seasons, and Carter Hart, right? Among those guys, I think Konechny is probably the one who would want to be here the most during a rebuild. I mean, seems like Torts really likes him. Again, I don't know what these players think, but he's a guy that I think they're going to hold out to try and get a ton of value. I don't think they see a reason necessarily to trade him. They could trade Konechny in a few years at the trade deadline, and I'm sure get a first-round pick, probably more. So why do it now, right? Wait and see what happens. Scott Lawton, I think he loves it here. I think he feels a real bond with the team. It's the only team he's played for, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind going, trying to win a Stanley Cup somewhere. And he's got some value. Carter Hart's the one who, on that spectrum of those three guys, I'm guessing would have the least tolerance to be here through a rebuild. I don't know if that's true or not. So as Anthony was mentioning, he's a guy who, if you moved him, it would make you worse this year, which helps your draft position. And I also am not sure that he's going to want to sign here long term, because at the end of next season, he's a restricted free agent again, and he could do a 1-year arbitration thing and walk into unrestricted free agency. I don't know if it's 1 or 2 years, but the whole situation is very tricky and interesting. I still don't think that, I know that teams are bracing for stuff, and Anthony's obviously very connected. I still don't know if anyone can predict exactly what's going to happen here, because there's lawsuits being threatened and no one's actually been charged with anything, but none of these players, the Flyers can't trade Carter Hart until something comes out. There's pressure on the league to announce something. I just am really interested to see what happens in the fallout from it, because it's probably going to happen before the London police investigation is concluded. So the whole thing is very fascinating. But if Hart is involved in this and he's suspended for the start of the season, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they try and trade him after that. If he's not involved and he's cleared, I'm going to guess that they're going to look to try and trade him shortly thereafter. But it's a tricky situation. Here's the other thing to keep in mind. Like, if Carter Hart, he mentally, imagine what this kid's been going through. Like, first of all, if he's involved in this, that's terrible, right? Like, I think a lot of Flyers fans are not going to want him on the team, and we don't know what the level of involvement is. But just thinking about it, like, this has probably been a very difficult situation for him over the last number of years, having this sort of cloud hanging over you, right? And so maybe that's factored into his play, his mentality. I don't know. It's sort of into uncharted territory with some of this stuff, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. Chef, real fast before we want to move on to some of the alternatives. Yeah.
I think it would be stupid for the NHL to do anything ahead of time before the actual. I think it would probably be probably announced very close to each other, because you can't suspend somebody, I guess, or do those items if they're not formally charged. I think I think that's where the lawsuit comes into play. So that's my opinion on that. So I think you're going to hear that happen like later in, towards maybe the end of the summer, I'm guessing, before anything else will happen out of that.
No, I don't think it's going to happen during a lull, probably on a Friday or something like that, like political news, or a Saturday. I mean, that's probably what's going to happen, and there are a lot of people prognosticating on that. Hey, but the Flyers do have some options, and some of them reside in Russia. One of them was looking kind of strange at a press conference in Russia. I'm not counting on Ivan Fedotov coming anytime soon. He's out of his military obligation, and he talked about being with CSKA in the KHL and not wanting to necessarily come right back to North America or into North America and play, because he didn't really have a lot of chance to play while he was in the Army or Navy or whatever it was. And compare the experience to being in the Soviet Union. So Fedotov is going to be like, what would be 29 or 30 years old before he would actually get the opportunity to come over here. And by that point, Alexei Kolosov is going to be here after this season. Dan, maybe you want to talk about that player who's probably right with Samuel Ursan, the best prospect they have, but he's younger and he's on an even higher trajectory, we assume.
Yeah, I'm super excited about Alexei Kolosov. So the Flyers drafted him in 2021 in the third round. And if you look at what he did last year in the KHL, he was the only starting goalie in the KHL under the age of 22 years old last year. He played in 42 games, had a 2.55 goals against average, 912 save percentage. He's extremely athletic. comparable wise, from a numbers perspective, Igor Shesterkin, who's one of the better goalies in the NHL with the Rangers, at the same age over in Russia, he only played 7 games in the KHL. So, and he had very similar stats. They both had a .912 save percentage. Ilya Sorokin was like outrageously otherworldly, but when he was the same age, the Islanders starting goalie, but he was playing on one of the better teams in the league in the KHL. Kolosov's playing with Dynamo Minsk, and they are not one of the better teams in the league. They let up a lot of scoring chances. They were like third last in their division. Kolosov he's the best goalie prospect in Russia right now. I would have him rated in the top 15 goalie prospects in the NHL. I think there's an argument to be made that he's a better goalie prospect than Samuel Ersson. If you look at a lot of the lists that are coming out now, they don't have Kolosov in the top 15 or the top 20. But again, that's the Russia factor. Like, teams aren't rating these kids from Russia as highly as some of the people that they're more familiar with. Kolosov is an extremely good goalie prospect. And between him and Samuel Ersson, I think that there's a very good chance that one of those guys becomes a legitimate top 15 starting goalie in the NHL, which makes it more palatable to look at maybe trading away Carter Hart. So yeah, I was so excited when the Flyers signed Kolosov to a 3-year entry-level contract. He's being loaned back to Dynamo this season. And next year, I'm guessing that he may come over to the U.S. The tricky thing with these Russian goalies is they don't really want to play in the AHL, right? The KHL is a better league than the AHL, so he really probably will want to come over when he'll have an NHL spot. But there's going to have to be a little bit of give, so he may come over and play in the AHL for a little bit. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what Kolosov does this season over in the KHL. And when he comes over, he's a really exciting, fun goalie prospect that the fans can look forward to. You know, Fedotov, the whole contract situation there is extremely messy. Sure seems to me like he's going to end up staying in Russia. But signing Kolosov while that was going on was a kind of like a bright light for me, if something there.
Yeah, I think in the aftermath of the Michkov situation, and then the Fedotov kind of let down, there was a brief period, an interim, where we thought Fedotov might the IIHF or something like that. Yeah. They were going to rule that whether the Flyers having told Fedotov's contract, whether it was still enforceable. And there was some very cryptic language used by Fedorov from CSKA, or I don't know if he's with the KHL, I'm not sure, about how that was administered. But we can't worry about it
now, maybe, or something.
Oh, it's his agent, right? It's typical Russian speak. They talk a lot, they say nothing, and the translation is not very good. And it doesn't. The bottom line is they're going to get what they want over there, and the Flyers aren't without options. So that's the good news. Ersson is a really good prospect. Kolosov is like a couple years behind him. And both of these guys probably in the long run look like they could be better players. It'll be interesting to see if the Flyers hang on to Dan. Will they have to toll his contract again if they're still interested, or how do you anticipate that works? Fedotov, if they're hanging on to their shred of hope with that.
I have no idea. Anthony may have more insight into that. I mean, you know, Fedotov signed the 1-year deal with the Flyers last offseason, and before he could come over, he was arrested and served his military duty. The Flyers are arguing that the contract tolls, which means it carries over because the customer, the contract, the player didn't have a chance to play out his contract. Now Fedotov has signed a 2-year contract with CSKA. I don't know how it all works. I think the Flyers are probably, if this contract that they signed with him isn't upheld, I think that it's just gonna because the KHL was saying that the contract has basically already been served because it was a year contract, and the Flyers are saying that he never had the chance to actually do it. I don't know. It's a legal issue. How much is really going to happen, you know, on a legal issue between Russia and North America? I mean, it's going to have to, the IAHF is going to have to weigh in, and the KHL is going to have to respect their judgment if there's any chance of Fedotov coming over, I think. But at this point, I'm not assuming we'll see him in a Flyers uniform. He's also, again, he's older. He's 26, 27 years old.
Now,
last year, the Flyers were going to sign him, and he was going to become an unrestricted free agent the year after. So even if he comes over, how long is he going to be with the Flyers? I don't know. Who knows?
It just would have been fun to watch. I think that was like one of the few things we were really looking forward to, and one of the few moves that Fletcher made, that we thought, oh, okay, here's something positive. And I, like everything last year, just blew up. But moving on from that, Anthony, are the Flyers done? Are there any whispers that there's some other things, other opportunities for them to do some things? And if so, what would that be?
I just want to add one thing on the goaltending front is I don't want to count out Carson Bjarnason either, the guy that they took this year in the second round. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
But, Mark Seidel, who I've talked to a bunch over the last few years, who works for the Barrie Colts, has his own scouting agency, tweeted last night that he thinks the Flyers had the best draft of any team, and mentioned Bjarnason as a guy who he thinks has a real chance to be a starter in this league. So, Fedotov aside, you have three guys in Urson, Kolosov, and Bjarnason that I think could really have a good opportunity here to be starting goaltenders in the NHL somewhere down the line. But in terms of other opportunities, I'm going to assume that this is more or less the team here. I think that the only thing really that is left to be determined, aside from the Carter Hart stuff and potential goaltending, but taking that aside, it's more just a few guys on whether or not they could crack the team out camp. I'm looking at, let's say, a Tyson Forster. What's going to become of him? Can he lock in a spot in the top 9? In my opinion, him and Wade Allison are competing directly against each other. I think the clock is ticking on Wade Allison, although they do believe in his talent. So I think he's going to get a good chance here. And the other would be on the defense with Ronnie Attard, because, with DeAngelo gone, there's a big spot open on the right side of that defense. Presumably Sean Walker is going to be playing third pair right side, kind of just plugging in for Justin Braun. But I think in that top 4, presumably beside Travis Sanheim, there's a spot there with DeAngelo out of the picture. So I think you're going to see a Ronnie Attard get a chance here. I've heard mixed reviews on whether or not he's ready. I think that's where Mark Stahl comes into play. But I don't think we're going to see any other transactions, major transactions, that is. I think the roster is more or less the way that we're looking at it now. I think we're just going to have to see if guys and I keep bringing up Forster and Attard because I think those two have the most chance, or the best chance rather, to lock in a spot moving forward. I think Forster is going to be on this team in some capacity. And then you also have maybe Wade Allison competing against a Ryan Poehling. And if he beats out Poehling, maybe Poehling's the 13th forward and Lawton is your 4C, something in that capacity. But Ronnie Attard's interesting to me because, in my opinion, he just has to beat out a Mark Stahl / Nick Seeler / Sean Walker. I don't see that Attard has any internal competition because of the position he plays on that right side. Helgi Grans, I guess, maybe. But I mean, I'm very intrigued rather to see what becomes of Ronnie Attard.
Yeah, I just wonder about his foot speed, and I want to see that and his reads if they've improved enough, and maybe they have. Dan?
To me, the prospects that should make this team, if we're just going on talent and ability, would be Tyson Forster, Elliot Desnoyers. I thought that he was really good when he came up last year. I think he's going to become a John Tortorella favorite. The addition of Ryan Poehling may push Desnoyers out of the Flyers roster to start the season. But Forster, Desnoyers, and Emile Andre, to me, are the three guys who, and Bobby Brink too, should deserve a look just based on talent. At Forster, Desnoyers, Brink, and Andre, I think, are the best prospects, non-goalie prospects, that are going to be available in camp for the Flyers. I'm not a fan of Ronnie Attard. He may get that spot. I'm sure they'll give him a chance. They're going to let a bunch of guys sink or swim. Egor Zamula is going to be really interesting to see what happens, because I think that Emile Andre is a better hockey player than Egor Zamula. Zamula's been around a little bit longer, and he'll probably get a little bit of a longer look. But I just
and
think
he needs waivers too.
Yeah, they're both left-hand defensemen. I just think Andre's a better player. So that's going to be, to me, is going to be interesting in camp, is if Andre outplays Zamula and Adard, because you could put Stahl on the right side. If Andre outplays both of those guys, and Forster and Desnoyers and Brink outplay Allison and Lazinski and Brian Paling, like, those are the things that are going to be interesting for me during camp to see how it plays out. We know that Samuel Ersson's a better goalie than Felix Sandstrom. I think we know that. Last year during Ersson's look, it looked like he would be a guy that they would definitely be able to have over Sandstrom this year. I've heard some people say that they don't, that Sandstrom, they would have to pass through waivers. But, like, here's the thing. There's goalies out there like Daniel Vladar. First of all, Mackenzie Blackwood, who's a better goalie than Sandstrom, got traded for whatever was a 6th-round pick. Daniel Vladar is a guy who Calgary is desperate to move right now so that they can free up a spot for Dustin Wolf. They can't get any offers for the guy. I just can't see a team picking up Felix Sandstrom or the Flyers being able to trade him for anything. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's going to be an interesting thing to see how it plays out.
What I've heard about Felix Sandstrom is that they see value in him as an in-house backup. They like the goaltending depth that he gives them. And I think at this stage in his career, he's probably a good 3, but because of the waivers aspect, they do feel like he has good talent. And I had one person say that they felt that the team played a lot differently in front of him. They would play worse. I've had, I think it was Jason Martinez who kind of used this comparison. I liked it. If they could see him as a Anthony Stolarz, a guy that could be your backup for a long time, and you don't always have to go out and get the Brian Elliott's, the Michael Neuvirts, the Martin Joneses of the world. And I think that's why they like Felix Sandstrom, because they feel like they could just ride this guy out for the next 4 or 5 years as just, okay, he's your steady backup, your steady backup, your steady backup. And because they rather give an Ersson or in the future, let's say a Kolosov, that starting job in Lehigh as opposed to just being a backup. And I do think they really enjoy their depth at the position. Even forget about Carter Hart for a second. Let's say you have Peterson and Sandstrom in the NHL, or Ersson and Sandstrom in the NHL, and you have Peterson in the AHL. That's good depth. It's not great top talent, but it's a decent depth. And as for, you bring up the players who could beat out others in camp, I do agree on Emil Andre. Zamula, I think I would put in the same camp as, let's say, a Wade Allison. The clock is ticking now. You have to put up or shut up. I wonder if he could make a transition to the right side. Maybe the style he plays is maybe a defense first guy. He can maybe work on that right side. Stylistically, it feels like him and maybe Sanheim could work well together.
You're talking about Andre?
Yeah, no, Zamula.
Oh.
Zamula, but then again, they are both tall, lanky guys, so I'm not sure how that would work out. It's because I feel like Andre to me, and I haven't seen him a lot, but it feels like he could drive his own pair. He would just kind of need a steady Eddie beside him. And it's so crazy to say this, but the only steady Eddie they have right now is kind of Rasmus Ristolainen after Bradshaw completely rebuilt him. And to me, and Isaiah, you've said this before, that in an ideal world, this would probably be a very good second pair. But I think the only slam dunk that you maybe have going into camp is York and Ristolainen as your top pair. Because I think York complements Risto complements York well, and York maybe finally getting a good shot on that left side, stable, not moving off of it, having some stability there. I don't know who would be a better option for him as his partner on the right side than Aristo, stylistically wise and play wise. On the right side, I don't think you have a better option than Ristolainen right now.
That's a tough call because they want to get more from Sanheim, and he's probably played best with Risto or York. So I don't think Sanheim and York is a great pairing. The D is what's going to be worth watching. Are they going to have to go out and make a trade for some veteran, even beyond what they have, to calm things down? Because I think it's going to be a storm, to be honest with you.
Well, I think that's what their thought process was with a Mark Stahl. Like, look, I always say this. In an ideal world, you want like a Chris Tanev here. Like, that's the type of defenseman you want playing the York or an Emil Andre. But right now, the best guy you have is a Rasmus Ristolainen. And like, I kind of equate it to like what Buffalo did, where, you know, you have two awesome young defensemen in Dahlin and Power, the former that may win a Norris this year or in the coming years. And then they go out and they get an Eric Johnson, just a stable, stay-at-home veteran defenseman. I think he's going to play with Power. That's going to be their shutdown pair. I think that's what the Flyers need, more guys like an Eric Johnson, or kind of like what Fletcher did in 2019, where you go out, you get Niskin and you get Braun. Not guys that are going to jump off the page, but just stable defensemen that you know what you're going to get. Now, again, it's a 4-month sample size. But if Risto could be what he was from mid-November on last year, that's a guy that you could count on, I think, in that type of role. But is that going to be him? Because there's 7 years that precedes that was the polar opposite of a steady Eddie. So you have to hope Risto holds firm there. And then you also need another guy, in my opinion, because Mark Stahl, that's a stopgap. You know, Nick Seeler, Sean Walker, these are stopgaps. Can you find an Eric Johnson, a Chris Tanev, that type of defenseman? And I think that will be so important because, you know, we saw it with Provorov and Sanheim and Gostisbehere in 17, where you were playing them with McDonald and Gudis and Folin, and it was horrible for their development. There is value in having some stable vets beside them. So I agree, Isaiah. I think eventually they're going to have to look at it bringing at least one more stable right shot defenseman, and maybe two, depending on what happens with Risto.
To anybody who can play the right side at this point, I think that's going to be the situation. If there's going to be a tire fire on the ice, it's going to be back on the blue line with the Flyers. And it's a situation that bears watching that I think, like Anthony said, is going to result in some type of activity, trade, acquisition, waiver pickup, what have you. I think, you know, they'll go with the waiver wire first. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think we're going to kind of wrap it up there. Let's get some final thoughts. Anthony, anything on your mind before you go, and where can people find you on social media and elsewhere?
Well, you can find my work at thefourthperiod.com, my social media, DeMarco25. And I guess my thoughts would be is, like Dan said, not expecting a great team, arguably going to be worse than last year, especially depending on what happens with Carter Hart. But what I will say is that they've committed to a rebuild for 3 months now, and look how much more positive the long-term outlook already seems, with pretty much one significant trade. Aside from Provorov, all they did was gut guys out for nothing. So I think that we've also, with Fletcher out of the way, we've been able to appreciate Brent Flair's work more. I think Brent Flair has really shown himself to be a valuable asset to this team. Not just this year, but even going back to when he first joined the club in 2019, I think he's done really good work for the Philadelphia Flyers. And now that we're away from this aggressive retool garbage, we can kind of appreciate what they've built. And now that they've committed to it from the top all the way down, I do think that brighter days are ahead. Obviously, there still is a lot of work to be done, but it's crazy how in just 3 or 4 months of committing to a rebuild, how much more positive the overall outlook seems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people are going to be there like, hey, yeah, we know this sucks, but they have the right plan in mind. We're on the right road. And that's what people need. I think that feeds into the optimism that Chef has. Chef, any final thoughts from you?
Well, yeah, you kind of summed it up. I was thinking, like, all right, look, I'm going into next year saying the team's going to be bad. But just because they're bad doesn't mean you can't see improvement or a good culture being built. You'll see improvement in certain areas and the individual players and all that. Overall, I expect them to be a fairly competitive team. They're going to lose games by 1-2 goals, kind of similar to last year. I think it's going to swing on a little bit lower. You're going to see a little bit more heartbreak games that they probably should have won. And it's really all going to depend on the goaltending and the defense. I think this year where it comes in, I think goals are going to be hard to come by again, but still it's going to be the taste of defeat will be a little more palatable now that you got something to look forward long term. So you can reach me at Chef the Left B, Chef number 2, the Left B.
You got it, Dan.
So one of my favorite prospect pundits, Scott Wheeler from The Athletic, came out today with his top 50 drafted skaters list, which is always exciting. And it's really, so he had Michkov number 2, right behind Connor Bedard, ahead of Adam Fantilli. He had Michkov number 2, and he had Cutter Gauthier number 13. It's the first time in a long time I can remember the Flyers having a top 5 prospect, and also the first time that they've had 2 guys like in the top 15. So to me, that's pretty exciting. He did the top 50. He also had honorable mentions, and he had Andre Brink and Tyson Forster on there. So those are the, kind of excitement. Again, the Michkov excitement, Gauthier. Just wanted to mention that. Fans can check that out over at The Athletic, but that was exciting. We've got the Dauber Prospects Fantasy Guide, and their prospect stuff's going to be coming out, which is fun to see. But yeah, no, that's I just wanted to mention that. And folks can find me on Twitter at dsilver88.
Fantastic. And if anybody who follows us on Twitter or Getter who gives us an Apple review, or Spotify's okay, Apple is preferred. But if you give us a review and you follow us, you can be entered in a giveaway that will allow you to get the 23-24 Fantasy Hockey Guide from Dauber Hockey. Fantastic information. And it's based on a lot of analytics and stuff like that. So it's not just fantasy and not useful. You learn so much about the game and the league by playing fantasy hockey or taking in fantasy content. All you have to do is DM us with your follower and your review, with a screenshot, and you'll be entered into a contest. The first 5 people that get back to us with a DM will be entered into it, and we'll announce a winner. And you really should check out DauberHockey.com and at DauberHockey on Twitter. And you can follow the O&B Puckcast at O&B Puck at O&B Puck. So it's been great. We have another show coming up in a few weeks. I think we're going to have our Around the League show with Lyle Richardson from Specters Hockey. We're going to cover the entire league, what happened, who stayed, who went, and all that fun show. But until next time, everybody, take care.